I have no idea how small the subset of gamers who'll know what I'm talking about here is, but here goes. A huge number of the PC games I played pre, let's say 2005, were sold by publishers, sold out sales and marketing through their £4.99 label, Sold Out Software. That company, through a journey that I'm fairly sure is only of interest to me, is now Fireshine Games. But the orange and white boxes those games came in are still ingrained deep within my memory. It's been 20 years now, but I could still rattle through a good few titles off the top of my head. I mentioned Broken Sword 2 in our recent review of The Drifter, but I'm hit with a wave of nostalgia just from looking at the covers of things like Commandos, Pharaoh, and titles that, probably for good reason, I'd long forgotten before I started on this tangent, like Eidos' Cutthroats. If I hadn't lost you already, I must have done so there. But there are two games, both developed by New World Computing and originally released in 1999, that stand out far above the rest from that catalogue. While plenty of people seem to be quite rightly nostalgic about Heroes of Might and Magic 3, particularly judging by the number of subsequent attempts to rebottle that game's lightning, Heroes was a spin-off of a series that is now much less spoken about. While I'll admit that Heroes 3 is pretty much neck and neck with it, there's a game from that original series which I'm more sentimental about, though perhaps just due to it having been left more firmly in the past than Heroes ever was. Might and Magic 7 for Blood and Honor was, much like its cousin Heroes 3, the pinnacle of its series for me. That's probably because it's the first one I played, there's a lot of love for its predecessor too, but the series has been more or less abandoned after original owners 3DO went bust in 2003 and Ubisoft bought the rights. There's been one attempt to add to it since Ubisoft got their hands on it, which I tried and failed to enjoy, and if you need the evidence, here's a snippet of barely bearable footage from 12 years ago of exactly that.
I haven't played a Might and Magic game in about 10 years because there hasn't been a good one in about 10 years. Might and Magic 7 came out in 1999 and I played that to death.
Lovely. This is all a roundabout way of saying that I really quite liked Might and Magic 7, and so what really piqued my interest in the somewhat confusingly named Heroes of the Seven Islands from developer Rap2H and publishers Two Left Thumbs was just one small statement. Inspired by Might and Magic 3 through 8. Nothing yet has managed to scratch that itch. Surely this poorly hand-drawn, by the developer's own description, micro-indie isn't going to be the one to do it. So first, for the people who are looking to relive some magic, or might, from a 26-year-old game, there's a lot that hits right here in terms of that nostalgia. That satisfying little magic trill, this one. That's dangerously reminiscent of this one. From Might and Magic, the barrels full of suspicious liquid that permanently boost your character's stats, the re-rolling of your party 1 hour in because you don't like one of the classes you picked, and in retrospect what a massive difference that made here in the Seven Islands, more on that in just a moment, or most obviously of all, simply the layout of the game. There's an awful lot more than just that, and if you're a fan of the Might and Magic series, you might already notice some of those similarities yourself. But so as not to lose the single viewer who clicked on this video without caring about Might and Magic, and honestly good on you, we'll move on. Anyone who's played a party-based RPG, be it a single-player experience or a full-blown MMO, will know the importance of having a balanced party. With 4 characters, I think it's fair to say that the go-to is typically someone tankier to soak up the damage, a healer to restore any damage that's taken, and then a couple of characters to deal damage. And if we want to expand on that even further, one who's magical and one who's physical. So that's what I adopted on my first attempt in Seven Islands. Almost the most obvious starting party. A knight, a monk, a sorcerer, and to jazz things up just a tiny bit, an assassin instead of a thief. By and large, I was happy with the first 3 classes performing their roles admirably, but the assassin felt underwhelming. Which, in my opinion, is a good thing in a game like this. The classes needn't be entirely balanced, as it allows for players to alter the difficulty by picking a team they perceive to be less optimal. If I ever sit down for a second playthrough of Seven Islands, which I don't think is out of the question, as I think there is a fair amount of replayability here, I'll likely do so with a party of characters which I think might struggle a little more than the one I completed the game with. That's because once I'd replaced my assassin for a barbarian, the game shaped out to be relatively straightforward. The barbarian and sorcerer were dealing damage like crazy, the knight was making everyone exceptionally resilient, and the monk was doing his part by propping up any and all lost health each round. That would only improve over time. The knight's special ability continued to scale to keep everyone shielded, and the monk and sorcerer eventually learned some pretty powerful buffs that I could throw onto the barbarian in the first round to allow him to always hit for maximum damage and to always take 2 attacks each turn. That became an incredibly competent strategy, which did lead to my battles playing out in pretty much the same way every single time. But I can't say I particularly minded. It did feel to some extent like I'd broken the game. The final boss fight was far easier than even the most basic of fights I'd had in the early stages, but I'd also spent a significant amount of time ensuring that everything was as maxed out as possible before I got there. I will quickly return to Might and Magic, sorry again to that one viewer, to point out that there is sometimes a little more depth to building a party. A key part of those games were the skills and the fact that not everyone could learn everything. In Might and Magic 7, the highest level a skill could become was Grand Master, and most of those were unique to one of the game's 9 classes. The only class that could get to Grandmaster in disarming traps, for example, was the Thief. The only class who could become a Grandmaster Merchant was the Cleric. And both of those were things I was utterly adamant I needed when playing all those years ago. Seven Islands borrows that mechanic, although it's significantly more forgiving than in its muse. Here there are only 3 levels, Basic, Expert and Master, and many classes can become a master of any given skill. That means for some of the most important skills, like having at least one master of lockpicking in your team, you're guaranteed to have someone who can learn it, provided each member of your party is a unique class. That's probably just as well, as I couldn't find an easy way to tell who could learn what, and I can imagine it would get incredibly frustrating to get halfway through a playthrough and realise you'd, quite literally in that instance, locked yourself out of some incredibly valuable loot all the way back when you were selecting your party. That does lead to the classes feeling a little homogeneous in places, as their special abilities, which are, to be fair, very impactful, start to become the only unique things about them. I would say that's where my only criticism of the game lies. Perhaps it would overcomplicate things, but I think having a little more uniqueness, such as certain schools of magic being locked to certain classes, might have pushed that replayability a little further and made me more keen to dive right back in with a different team composition. The game's story is about as basic as it gets, but that feels appropriate for what's on offer. A convoluted tale with twists and turns would feel out of place against the intentional simplicity of everything else. It does mean that running through dungeons is how you spend almost all your time in Seven Islands, though the occasional puzzle and side quest does add enough extra content to break it up such that it never feels like a slog. And for me at least, I never got bored during my playthrough. That playthrough lasted, suitably enough, around 7 hours, and I think that's relatively fast. With a less well-oiled machine of a party, I imagine there would be a little more time spent on longer fights and tinkering to try and get them to an appropriate power level. So, onto the rating. It's a difficult one, as I can't exactly quantify how much my experience with Heroes of the Seven Islands is influenced by nostalgia. There have been other games which were reminiscent of Might and Magic. The 2-game Legend of Grimrock series comes to mind as something that looked like it should have hit that spot, and ultimately didn't. I can honestly say that, short of loading up Might and Magic 7 and playing it an inordinate amount of time under the guise of getting footage for this video, nothing has come as close to feeling like Might and Magic as Heroes of the Seven Islands does. I can strongly recommend it for anyone who played those games and wants a throwback to them, though I think it's still a neat enough experience that you can enjoy it without benefiting from that for the fourth and final time, nostalgia. For me, with that caveat, it's been one of my favourite gaming experiences in recent months, so I think that has to be reflected in my rating. Heroes of the Seven Islands is awarded an 8 out of 10 by IndieLoupe.